お待たせいたしました。
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for waiting. We will start International Symposium organized by Renewable Energy Institute, Revision 2017, Future that Renewables Make Possible. First of all, on behalf of the organizer, the Chair of Executive Board, Renewable Energy Institute, Dr. Thomas Caberia, will welcome you.
Good morning and very welcome to this Revision 2017. I think it is maybe the most important conference that we have hosted. It's important because the developments globally are going rather well for renewables, at the same time as the development in Japan is in important aspects rather slow. If we look at what happened in the world last year, we saw some important, impressive progress when it comes to getting down the cost of renewables. Early 2016, a procurement in Morocco resulted in prices for onshore wind of below 30, or 30 on average, for the contracts for the electricity procured. This is cheaper than any conventional power plant built in recent years. Solar electricity that has for a long time been considered too expensive to be relevant on a large scale and something that can only be used in special niche markets, but not yet ready to meet global energy needs, showed a really dramatic, development. But first, offshore wind, also seen as very expensive traditionally, had a remarkable chain of contracts reducing prices. This news article from July reported that procurement outside the Dutch coast in Northern Europe had resulted in a price of just above 70 euros per megawatt hour, or roughly 10 yen per kilowatt hour, for a contract of offshore wind electricity. This was at the time considered remarkably cheap. 2 months later, another procurement process off the Danish west coast resulted in a price of around 60 euros per megawatt hour. And another 2 months later, in November, an offer was provided for offshore wind off the east coast of Denmark below 50 euros per megawatt hour. This was a result at the time when the International Energy Agency published a report, the World Energy Outlook, where they thought that by 2040, offshore wind would still cost 100 euro per megawatt hour in Europe. So the industrial development has gone very fast and much faster than most experts in the world have been able to predict. Solar started the year at around $50 per megawatt hour, and these contracts were then, in the early part of last year, described as stunningly cheap. But just a few months into the year, we saw the first contracts below $30 per megawatt hour, or 3 cents, or 3 yen per kilowatt hour. It happened in Dubai, it happened in Chile, it happened again in Abu Dhabi. This was a slightly more complex contract, so maybe the cost is a little lower than the real cost here. The price is lower than the real cost. But also Mexico managed to get a contract below $27. This means that now, in many parts of the world, solar and wind are the cheapest sources of new electricity. And once built, these plants have no fuel cost, low maintenance cost, and will always outcompete conventional sources of electricity. You may say, well, 2.5 cents per kilowatt hour in Abu Dhabi or Mexico, where the sunshine is intense, is not relevant for Japan, because in Japan, solar influx is only half of what it is in these countries. That is true, and it's true also for Northern Europe. But also in Northern Europe, we now have seen contracts that are equivalent to the same cost of building the solar power plants. The solar irradiation is only half, so the price is double. But that still means we have a price of around 5 cents per kilowatt hour of solar electricity in Northern Europe, in this case in Denmark in November. These prices and costs are much, much lower than the current feed-in tariffs or cost of renewables energy in Japan. We see a rapid development of solar and wind in the world. We have seen some solar development in Japan, but still, costs here are much higher and deployment much lower. This will soon become a significant economic problem for the Japanese household consumers, for the Japanese electricity consuming industries, and thereby for the competitiveness and economic well-being of Japan as a country. It is becoming very important that Japanese legislation, regulation, and industrial capacity catches up with the rest of the world. Electricity market regulation in most countries are designed to give the right to electricity consumers to buy the cheapest electricity anyone is willing to offer. The condition is that if you trade on the electricity grid, you have to ensure that for each contract, the amount of electricity consumed is equivalent to the amount of electricity supplied into the grid. That is essential for the grid to continue to operate. You must have someone economically liable for any failure of any contract. That is the simple basis for electricity markets in most parts of the world. A transmission system operator, independent of owners of power plants, serving the purpose of minimizing the cost for the whole electricity grid, is responsible to ensure that those who should pay after failing to meet the balance obligation do so. In addition to that, very little regulation is necessary. In Japan, we see a situation where the description that the electricity market is being liberalized or made more open is in fact performing in a way where the market is becoming so complicated, few can understand it, and those who look at it from the outside see that the real purpose of the regulation is to protect the old, out-fashioned, expensive power plants to continue to operate, something that's done at the expense of the Japanese consumers, the Japanese industry, and therefore the long-term economic well-being of Japan. Failing to modernize will be expensive. Toshiba is suffering from being late in understanding how the global industry is moving. Let's ensure that Japan is able to modernize quickly enough to avoid a similar development for the whole country. This is the purpose that we are trying to serve, and I hope that this day's conference will help achieve that goal by making many of you aware of the immense opportunities for Japan in this industrial development. Thank you, and I hope we have a good day.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is the co-founder, chief scientist of Rocky Mountain Institute, Dr. Amory B. Lovins. The keynote speech. Dr. Lovins, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the great honor of addressing you today. Long ago, fire made us human, then fossil fuels made us modern. China, which invented the oil, gas, and coal industries over 1,000 years ago, has lately used them to fuel the fastest economic growth ever, lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But now the rising costs of fossil fuels to China's security, economy, health, and environment are eroding, if not outweighing, their benefits. We need a new fire. Now, China's bold progress in domestic energy strategy and in helping craft and support the Paris Agreement has now become a vital engine of global climate and economic progress. And I'll summarize how China can achieve its ambitious greenhouse gas reduction goals and lead the world in reinventing fire by profitably adopting even more energy efficiency and clean energy. China is already the world market leader in renewable energy development in virtually every asset type, and is improving its energy productivity about 5% each year. How much more could be done? Well, Rocky Mountain Institute first applied the reinventing fire approach in the United States. Our business book in 2011 showed in detail how to run a 2.6 times bigger US economy in 2050 with tripled energy efficiency, quintupled renewables, and therefore no need for oil or coal or nuclear energy, and a third less need for natural gas. We showed that providing these greatly expanded energy services in this way would cost $5 trillion less than business as usual without pricing carbon or counting other externalities, and that this could be achieved with no new inventions and no acts of Congress, led by business for profit. 6 years later, led largely by many private firms and some state governments, the United States is on track to achieve this vision, and that progress is expected to continue, market-driven, business-led. Almost 4 years ago, eager to explore such a future for China, 4 leading institutions came together: the National Development and Reform Commission's Energy Research Institute in Beijing, the NDRC-sponsored Energy Foundation China, the U.S. Department of Energy's Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and Rocky Mountain Institute. More than 40 global experts intensively collaborated to identify an economic pathway for China to meet its energy needs using maximum efficiency and clean energy through 2050. And the team built a robust and rigorous end-use model to help understand China's future energy balance. We conducted extensive reviews with experts. We developed a detailed set of policy recommendations. As a conservatism, our analysis assumes only normal modern progress in improving technologies. We consider technologies only that are already commercialized. Rigorous cost-effectiveness screens ensure that all solutions create economic value without counting public health, climate, or security costs and benefits. We analyze all 4 sectors that produce or use energy: buildings, transport, industry, and transformation, which includes both electricity and other energy supply. We ground the analysis in more than 80 case studies of innovative global practices scalable in China. The results are exceptionally detailed, rigorous, and empirical, more so than any other study I know of in China or in Japan. And importantly, these are the findings of China's best energy modelers, model data examples, not foreigners telling China what to do. This helps explain why the findings so strongly influence the 13th five-year plan, now guiding China's development strategy. So reinventing fire is a pathway for China to create a clean, connected, prosperous, and secure energy future. It's a roadmap for the revolution, not a word the party uses lightly, that President Xi Jinping called for in the consumption and production of energy. The final reports were released September 5th last year at the G20 in Hangzhou, and the executive summary has just been translated into Japanese. Now let me give you some highlights. Our research found that China can support an economy 7 times bigger by 2050 compared to 2010, using the same amount of energy as in 2010, and that nearly 3/5 of that energy could be provided from non-fossil sources. The carbon dioxide emissions could be 42% lower than in 2010. Blue skies could again become normal. Water scarcity could be greatly reduced. So this future for China is both possible and profitable using technologies available today. And accelerating the early steps can bring many of these benefits soon. The opportunities here are greater in China than we found for the United States. There are 3 main reasons. First, despite its recent progress in efficiency, greater improvements remain to be done in China. China is undergoing huge structural change, especially rebalancing the economy away from energy-intensive basic materials industries. And China is still building more of its infrastructure and can more easily build it right than fix it later. China also has proven that it can make these big changes with incredible speed. China's rise over the past 3 years to become the global production leader in 8 different renewable technologies is just one sign of this industrial prowess, policy coherence, and resolute execution. In 2013 alone, for example, China added more photovoltaic capacity than the United States had added cumulatively since developing the technology 59 years earlier. Now, taking a closer look, reinventing fire uses energy far more efficiently before shifting to clean supplies. Our analysis finds that China could reduce its 2050 primary energy needs by 47% below the reference case, while achieving the same or better wealth and quality of life. These efficiency solutions deliver the same value and function using less energy, less money, better technology. This chart breaks down those energy-saving opportunities across the 4 key energy-related sectors. Industrial production is the largest driver of China's energy use and emissions, and we found major opportunities in energy efficiency, production demand reduction, and shifting to higher quality materials, especially cement and steel, and China's the biggest producer of both. For example, the new World Trade Center building in New York used 40% less cement by using concrete with nearly twice the compression strength. And if China were to use such innovative materials in its current urbanization over the next 20 years, it could save cement and associated energy equivalent to the cumulative total used by Germany and the United Kingdom combined. Of course, basic production processes and equipment can also be improved. For example, motors use about 60% of industrial electricity, and using 35 different well-understood improvements, a typical motor system can save up to half its energy, 3 times the normal savings at a fifth the normal unit cost, because only 7 of the 35 improvements need to be paid for. The other 28 are free byproducts. But changing the way we design motor-driven systems can save even more. Half the energy from motors drives pumps, fans, and compressors. But bad system design wastes most of that energy, especially by the friction in long, narrow, crooked pipes. This pumping system at the right was redesigned with short, fat, straight, or gently curved pipes to reduce the friction and therefore the pumping energy by 86% at lower capital cost. The environmental benefits are even greater. By reversing compounding losses, each unit of friction or flow saved in the pipes saved 10 units of coal at the power plant. We call this approach integrative design, optimizing whole systems for multiple benefits rather than isolated components for single benefits, and we are writing how-to manuals to help Chinese engineers apply it. If China's buildings were a country, they would be the 3rd largest energy user in the world, behind China and the United States as a whole. China's on a path to double its commercial building space by 2050, but most of its energy can be saved by combining ancient Chinese design practices with modern technologies to yield attractive paybacks and make people more healthy, comfortable, and productive. For example, in Qinhuangdao, in Hebei province, 9 apartment buildings built to the German passive standard used 62% less heating energy and had 10 times less PM 2.5 indoor air pollution. But these innovations are not just restricted to new buildings. Old ones have big opportunities too. In 2009, Rocky Mountain Institute led the retrofit design of the iconic Empire State Building in New York. By manufacturing 6,500 windows on site into super windows that let light through but not heat, and by improving lights and other equipment, by integrating the biggest wireless control network in any building in the world at that time, its owner was able to save 38% of the energy use and a lot of capital for a 3-year payback. Such design continues to improve dramatically. Those savings were nearly doubled 3 years later in our retrofit, saving 70% in this half-century-old government office, making it more efficient than the best new US office, which in turn is only half as efficient as our own new office. And the technologies needed to do this existed over a decade earlier. What mainly changed was not efficiency, but design. Now, transportation is the smallest demand sector, but its rapid growth has already made China the world's biggest oil importer. And the key to transforming energy use in transportation is threefold. First, minimize transport demand. Next, make the remaining demand as efficient as possible. And finally, switch to cleaner sources of supply. This includes good urban design that integrates and distributes where people live, work, shop, and play, so they needn't travel far nor by car. Architect Peter Calthorpe is helping redesign Zhongong, for example, around 1.5 million pairs of feet, not cars, so driving will fall by 2/3. This shift from a superblock arterial network for cars to a capillary web builds a human ecology with vibrant commerce, rich social interaction, 1/3 less concrete, but equal or better throughput, cleaner air, and happier citizens. Cities designed this way will use little oil. Despite fast-growing passenger demand, freight still accounts for 2/3 of China's mobility energy. Fortunately, trucks can become several times more efficient, and so can their logistics. Carrying freight by rail or water also is 4 times more efficient than today's trucks, but in developed economy 8 times cheaper. In the past 2 decades, Mexico has boosted its growth by more than doubling rail freight and increasing its share by a third. We've also run a workshop in Shenzhen, helping launch innovations to provide a smartphone platform for freight dispatch, so China can bring the empty fraction of its truck hauls down to the 2-fold lower level that's normal in Western economies, or even lower. This could save 100 million tons a year of CO2. Once we minimize demand, many cost-effective technologies can be applied to reduce vehicles' weight and drag, improving efficiency 4 to 8-fold in automobiles, 3 to 5-fold in heavy trucks and airplanes, at least 2-fold in buses and ships. Off-the-shelf technologies can economically double to triple the efficiency of all modes of transportation, and operating cost per kilometer can fall by as much as 3/4. Lower energy demand makes it easier to afford and quicker to install cleaner supply. So, reinventing fire shifts supply from 69% fossil fuels to only 43%. Coal's share falls by nearly half. Its total use falls by 80%. You may wonder how energy use, especially coal use, could drop so quickly while the economy still grows 7-fold. Let's take a closer look at how this is achieved in the electricity sector. Electrification increases while supply shifts to clean and renewable sources. By 2050, China would achieve electrification rates per capita higher than the current European levels. Non-fossil electricity would rise to 83% of the total, while renewable electricity would provide 69%. By 2025, China's best energy modelers find that wind and solar will be the cheapest new supply in large parts of China. And by 2035, the entire cost of new renewables will beat the marginal production cost of coal power per megawatt hour. Flexible demand then puts an 80% renewable grid well within reach. Denmark, Portugal, and other European countries today are already demonstrating load balancing at 50% or more renewables on an annual basis, and modern renewables are already pushing out coal generation, with China's 2016 average thermal plant capacity factor falling to 47.5%, the lowest since 1964. Until these cost transitions occur on average in 2025, 4 steps will greatly reduce China's need for more coal plants: diligently making electricity uses efficient, shifting market rules to run the most efficient coal plants more and make them more flexible, integrating demand response to manage peak loads, and following through on commitments to new renewable development. These can pretty much eliminate the need for additional coal plants beyond those already mostly built. Indeed, China is deauthorizing about 200 gigawatts of coal plants authorized as recently as 2015, but now seen as pre-stranded assets. China can also reorganize electric grids using a mixture of centralized and distributed resources, interconnected in new grid architectures to make major cascading failures impossible, improving national security and people's energy security. So employing all cost-effective measures, both demand side and supply side, at a brisk but achievable pace will make coal consumption, CO2 emissions, and primary energy demand all peak more than 10 years sooner and 40% lower. These results are consistent with President Xi Jinping's international peaking and non-fossil share commitments. The GDP produced per unit of energy used would rise 7-fold by 2050. China's carbon productivity, GDP per ton of carbon, would increase 12-fold. That's a bigger gain and 3 times faster than the Industrial Revolution's 10-fold gain in labor productivity over 120 years. You see why we call this revolutionary. Sulfur and nitrogen oxide emissions would also fall roughly 10-fold by 2050 before applying better controls or cleaner fuels. So we'd regain air quality not seen since the 80s. And these strategies also reduce dependence on oil and stem the growth of natural gas, making them peak respectively in 2030 and in 2045. Reinventing fire will stimulate significant national and local growth. The upfront investment of 35 trillion RMB produces 50 trillion RMB in savings for a 15 trillion RMB net present value benefit to the Chinese economy. So investing about 1 or 2% of GDP annually yields a strong financial return just in cheaper energy services before we price carbon or count any health, environmental, or security co-benefits. 6 key themes emerge from our analysis. First, there's no time to waste. China needs to launch reinventing fire strategies as soon as possible. Second, a clean energy system becomes more affordable if you begin with efficiency as the first fuel. Third, facilitate technology deployment to improve energy productivity, 7x carbon productivity, 12x. The transition to an electrified low-carbon energy system is particularly important. Fourth, many gains can be made by designing at the system level and practicing integrative design. Fifth, because these solutions are economical, it's a great opportunity to build dynamic markets, harness natural innovation practices, and support the modernization of the economy. Finally, institutions will need to be revitalized to capture these economic opportunities. From all this analysis, a plan emerges in 3 main stages. The current decade is about waging war on pollution to restore public health. From 2020 to 30, the goals are to first peak industrial carbon emissions, then all carbon emissions, finally oil demand by the end of the decade. And then to 2050, the goal is to complete the low-carbon energy transition by fully integrating a green and intelligent development model. So according to China's best energy analysts, their country can achieve its economic and environmental goals. Reinventing fire is a roadmap to do so, and if China diligently pursues reinventing fire, as it has begun to do, it will help create a country and a world that is richer, safer, fairer, and cooler for all forever. In my opinion, Japan can learn from the ambition and coherence of China's new energy strategy, now adopted in the 13th five-year plan, whose energy authors were our customers, and can help to further improve China's strategy too, through greater partnership. More importantly, by crafting a Japanese energy policy that enables the new energy system in Japan rather than protecting the old one. I thank you all for your good work and your kind attention. ご清聴誠にありがとうございました。
ロビンス様ありがとうございます。
Thank you very much, Mr. Lovins. Could we have a big round of applause for the speaker, please? Next, we have from Nissan Motor, Vice Chairman, Chairman and CEO, Innovation Network Corporation of Japan, Mr. Toshiyuki Shiga. So the floor is yours, sir. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Shiga. I'm very honored to be given this opportunity to speak and deliver a keynote speech. When you hear Nissan, you might think I've come to advertise EVs, electric vehicles. It's not just about penetration. Through EVs, we are thinking about creating a world that runs only on natural energy. And so I wanted to float some very realistic proposals. It's been 31 years since the car that runs on gasoline was born. Daimler and Mercedes gave rise to this car, and it's been roughly 30 years. Cars have made people's lives affluent, and it has contributed to economic development. But unfortunately, there are several negatives. And one of the largest negative is the fact that fossil fuels has been eaten up and emissions and environmental issues arise. CO2 is emitted and bringing about climate change and global warming. So the negatives we have to eradicate. Otherwise, the automotive industry itself will not be sustainable as an industry. So as an automotive company, that is what we are grappling with. COP21 has determined that we would contain the temperature rise to 2 degrees. And in terms of targets, with regard to the automotive industry, 2050, compared to 2000, CO2 emissions must be reduced 90%. So the cars which were born in the year 2000, annual efficiency was about 14 kilometers per liter. In 2050, if we are to manufacture a car, we have to manufacture one that runs 110 kilometers per liter. That's technologically impossible. So we'd like to spend 50 years to bring about the shift to zero-emission cars, from shifting from fossil fuels to renewable energy. 2050, the cars which are sold then will have no internal combustion engines, probably. So in what way do we bring about this shift? Most important is that since we are going to shift, what electricity that comes from coal, if we use that, in the end, we will not be having cars that run on natural or renewable energy, or hydrogen cars will not do the job either. So natural energy, the sun's energy, has to be stored in some way, and we have to find ways of putting that in the car. And if we move to the next screen, and in 2010, Nissan launched its EVs, the Nissan Leaf. And up until now, 250,000 cars have been sold approximately. The attractiveness of the EV is that from diverse sources of energy, it can generate electricity, hydrogen, wind, solar, and coal and oil. What we emphasize most is renewable energy. Cars that run on renewable energy is what we want to set forth as our target. By 2050, how much will these penetrate? And what is most important is the next slide. When it comes to solar, wind, and hydro, it's best if cars run on energies derived from these. But the base load power source cannot be provided by these. There's a certain amount of power which is generated, and natural energy is to be used above that. If we are to supply through natural energies in totality, we have to store it somehow. So photovoltaic, wind, and hydro power, how do we store that? We are working on that. If we work on the battery, if near the mega solar we have a large battery and we try to store power in terms of cost, it would not make sense. So through the penetration of EVs, inside the EVs, we have to use the batteries inside the cars to store the power. And the next slide shows this. Nissan Leaf, for example, if you have one unit, that's 24 kilowatts. The recent ones are 30 kilowatts. In general households, a day, about 10 kilowatts is consumed. So that's about 2 days' worth of electricity. So we talk about Leaf to home, the car inside the Leaf to be recycled in the homes. These are cars that we sell to create a network, IoT, tying cars together, and so that if we connect the EVs, this could become a virtual power plant, and we could use it as such. For example, 100 cars would supply Nissan Yokohama headquarters power demands. if we have 50,000 cars, the Nishiku, where the headquarters of Nissan is located, would be supplied with electricity. We did an experiment in Maui Island in Hawaii. We used a wind turbine. The wind generation often occurs in the morning. 30 megawatt hour of electricity is generated. The demand time is from late afternoon to the night time. So there's a mismatch. The surplus power can be stored in cars, and cars can run on it. So fossil fuel using cars has declined as a result of that. And the next experiment is the following: 32 megawatt of surplus power. We would store that in Nissan Leaf, and we would shift it, take it to where there is a demand. On Maui Island, the customers, 800 or so customers of Maui Island have registered, and we're doing a demonstration experiment, and the results are very favorable. And we believe that this can actually materialize. If we see an increase of this in the world, the automotives sold is about 87 million, and we can go to 100 million quite soon. And if each of these cars have a 30 kilowatt battery, the 3 billion kilowatt hour of electricity would be stored in cars. The largest issue related to renewable energy is that the nature decides the time of power generation, but by storing it in cars, cars were originally sold for transportation purposes. But if cars can be used for storage, in terms of cost, it would be very beneficial. So even if we see an increase of these cars, we can leverage renewable energy to a greater degree. As was mentioned by the earlier speaker, renewable energy cost is coming down. If we can store that, we can be more effective, even more effective. In Mr. Lovin's talk, there was talk about China in 2050. Sales of automobiles in China last year was 28 million units. This year, probably it will exceed 30 million. Japan's automotive sales is 5 million, so it's 6 times. All of this is, if these were all running on fossil fuels, it would be a major problem. So China is trying to shift to EVs. They're making positive efforts to do that. But it's not just about selling EVs. If it is used for storage of electricity, it would be very effective. Another proposal, now if we see an increase in penetration of EVs, there'll be unnecessary batteries. As automobiles, sufficient batteries would be. Well, my grandchild is often playing with Plarail. When the Plarail trains slow down in speed, you throw it away. But there's a lot of electricity left. So 70% of electricity is left. And so with regard to EVs, if the batteries are not functioning 100%, we could reuse that. We have launched a company called Core Energy. When EVs penetrate, you have used batteries, and you can collect that and use that for storage of electricity. You could unload it from the car in a package, and you load it onto containers, and you can send it to disaster-stricken areas. You can use it as a surplus or a reserve power source. And the next slide is Kagoshima Koshiki-jima Islands project. There's a wind turbine, 250 kilowatts, and then a 100 kilowatt PV generator. And the power from there, as mentioned before, unfortunately, is only generated, and we're very dependent on nature when there is a sun and the wind. And so, as was mentioned before, if we have placed a large storage system, power storage system, and inside, from leaf. The old batteries, used batteries, are taken out. It's been 6 years since we've launched the leaf, and we're seeing a generation of used batteries, old used batteries, and we would fill the center with these batteries, and we would store electricity when we have a surplus supplied from wind and PV. First was 24 kilowatts, and we have 280 kilometers. That's the distance where we get on Nissan Leaf. Through technological innovation, the distance will become greater and greater. The per vehicle battery in the past was 30 kilowatt hour. Most probably it will double or so going forward. So that will be the kind of technological innovation that will occur. And we will be using this electricity not just to operate cars, but we will store the energy and electricity. And we would reuse that so that batteries can have a longer life. EVs are gradually seeing the emergence of new winds, tailwinds, and penetration. There's a wind to enhance penetration by increasing EV penetration. High energy efficiency cars will penetrate, and we will use lesser and less fossil fuels, and we will be using more renewable energy. We will store electricity, and by reusing old batteries, the natural energy, a renewable energy society will be realized. Cars are not just vehicles to enable you to transport you from one place to another. It has electricity storage capabilities, and it will give rise to reuse of batteries. Now, these are some realistic proposals that I would like to put to you. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Thank you very much, Mr. Shiga. Could we have another round of applause for Mr. Shiga, please?
With this, we would like to close the opening session.